All right. Hey there, everyone, and welcome to this episode where we're going to talk about religious obsessive thoughts. Okay, so my name is Matt Codde, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm the founder of Restored Minds. And again, on this episode, what I wanted to do is, we're in this series on intrusive thoughts, right? And so I wanted to kind of break down the three main subcategories and then talk about specific thoughts within those subcategories. And so on today's episode, we're going to start talking about religious intrusive thoughts or religious obsessive thoughts. And I wanted to share, some of not only kind of a little bit about my own struggle with them in the past, but, basically how some key distinction when we're talking about treating people who have these kind of thoughts, okay? So the first and foremost is I want to talk about the types of thoughts we're talking about today. And those are going to be this idea about hell or demons, right? Because that seems to be a big kind of subcategory of religious thoughts. And it's this idea of like, as people will come in and, well, what if I go to hell? Or, what if I get possessed? And I wanted to talk about this because this was a specific obsession that I had when I was really stuck in OCD, many years ago. Is I had this thought, what if I get possessed by a demon? And then I would do all these reinforcing compulsive behaviors. Like I would do things like praying, right? I always pray, okay, well, no, please don't get possessed. Please don't get possessed. And I would do it at night, right? And then I'd have these certain routines that I'd have to do. And then I'd do things like, read the Bible and, things like that. And then I'd also call and get reassurance. And so I had specific people that I like pastors and people in my family that were religious, and I would call them to get reassurance, right? So those were some of the major compulsions I did, right? And it's important because we need to that'll come back to play in a few minutes when I kind of tie this all together. But it's important to understand that when we look at the idea of religious obsessions or religious intrusive thoughts, the most important thing is to realize that the content of the thought is never the issue. Okay. And so when I say that, let me kind of break that down for a second. So when you're dealing with anxiety or OCD or intrusive thoughts, let's not even throw a name on it, right? When you're having these thoughts pop in your head, right, that you realize they're kind of like invading, that you're consciously aware of them and you don't like their presence, right? What's important to understand is every time that I've worked with someone with these thoughts, whatever the thought is never the actual issue, okay? And so the content of the thought, so whether it's the thought of what if I go to hell, or, what if I hurt someone in my family on accident, what if I accidentally ran someone over in my car, or, if we move into the sexual intrusive thoughts, what if this, what if that, right? All the what if thoughts, right? Again, like in back to the initial analogy I talked about with the fisherman, right? All those what if thoughts are the lures, right? That are tossed out, right? The way you don't get caught is you don't take the bait. And when you have those what if thoughts and you're really caught in that content, it's like you have these goggles on, right? And when you really get caught in that loop, whether it's a religious theme, whether it's a harmful theme, sexual theme, it doesn't matter. When you're really caught in that loop, what happens is that's like, it starts to, you get that lens of OCD that I talk about, where it's like, it distorts everything you see. So if you're obsessing about the, religious theme like hell or the devil or getting possessed, what happens is you start to see that everywhere, right? Or people will you'll hear people mention it more in conversations because you're just going to be very hyper aware to that idea, right? Or that thought. But the thing is, it's no different than someone who has contamination OCD. And in the same way, when someone comes in, and they're like, well, I'm afraid of contamination, I might get AIDS or all that. It's not that it's not an AIDS issue, right? It's not a germ issue. It's not a contamination issue. It's an anxiety issue, right? It's an intrusive thought, an anxiety, and a compulsive behavior issue, right? It's that loop, right? And really the same exact thing holds true when it comes to these religious obsessions, especially around, hell or demons or the devil. Now, based on your specific religion and your beliefs, those things, you may believe those things to be true, and full disclosure, I was raised Christian. I still identify as a Christian and I still am practicing Christian. But it's what we need to understand, and this is what I had to understand in my own treatment, right? Because I kept doing all these things to try to, fight against the fear, right? All those compulsions. And what we need to understand is that these intrusive thoughts aren't a religious issue, right? we need to separate and identify what the real issue is. And it's easy for us to get caught up and think that the content of the thought is the issue. Meaning, like, if the thought is that, oh my gosh, what if I get AIDS? That it's an AIDS problem, right? So people will go and they'll get tested for AIDS again and again and again, and the test will be negative each time. But the problem is it was never an AIDS issue in the first place, right? And likewise, when it comes to these religious intrusive thoughts, it's not a religious problem, right? It's not a problem of hell or demons. And what we do ultimately with the treatment, instead of reassuring and doing all the things to try to get rid of these thoughts, is we have to do the exposure and response prevention to these thoughts, right? We have to experience the thoughts and then prevent all our compulsive behaviors, because what happens is ultimately that allows the anxiety to go down, right? And we can habituate to the presence of the thought, right? And when we are able to remove the anxiety out of that situation, right, with prolonged exposure, what happens is that kind of that lens comes off a little bit, right? And so we can make a separation from the thoughts, right? And it's not the goal of treating these thoughts is not to get this concrete answer, because that's the trap that everyone falls in, right? They come in, well, I need to know for sure that XYZ, right? Fill in the blank. And the thing is that we can't pursue certainty, because that's a trap that keeps that loop going, right? And when we keep that loop going, we feed it, and then it gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And that's why, like, when we talk about this idea of religious obsessions, it's so important. I wanted to talk about it because I get a lot of requests about it, but again, it's so important to realize that the content of the obsession is not relevant to the problem, okay? Because the problem is, again, that the thoughts are popping up, you're reacting to them, and you're treating them like they're a real threat, so your brain keeps producing them, right? I mean, like, that's what happens, right? It's like your brain just keeps populating the thoughts because you react to them and because you do compulsions. So your brain is learning that these thoughts are dangerous, so it's trying to help you, and it keeps putting out these thoughts into your consciousness, right? And so the more and more we fight against the thoughts, and try to, I need to be certain, the worse and worse and worse it gets, right? And so, like I said, I went on this path for months where I was just like laying in bed, oh my gosh, what if I get possessed? What if I get possessed? And I'd pray and pray and pray. And I would avoid shows, I would avoid movies, right? And so how I eventually broke out of that loop was, again, removing the compulsions that I did and realizing that it wasn't a possession problem. It wasn't a hell problem. It was an OCD and anxiety problem that I was dealing with. And making that distinction then puts you on the path on how to actually combat it, if that makes sense. It's like what's the biggest misdirection play that OCD and anxiety does is it gets you to focus on something and tells you that is the problem, right? But the reality is the fact that you're focusing on it and listening to the anxiety and OCD is actually the problem, right? It's a misdirection almost. So hopefully that makes sense when it comes to those specific thoughts on hell and possession. And I speak into this because it's something that I've experienced personally. And again, I've worked with a lot of people that have these as well. And really making that distinction of what the real problem is a crucial step in the recovery process. So again, hopefully you found this episode helpful. And again, it would really help us out if you'd give us a like and subscribe. And in the notes below, we have some links to some free resources to help you on your journey to recovery if this is something that you're dealing with. And so please go ahead and click down there to claim those. Again, they're yours totally free. And again, we always just appreciate you supporting the channel by giving us a, subscribe and follow and commenting below, for any ideas and any questions you have for further episodes. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to tune in and be with us this week. And we look forward to continuing on this series in the next week, where we're going to talk about intrusive thoughts when it comes to God and or more existential thoughts. So we're going to continue on with this series, and then we're going to move on to different types of intrusive thoughts as we move forward. So I'll see you guys soon, and hope you have a wonderful day.